So let's think about it for a minute. Here is a fellow who has been, as a result of spite, on 2 occasions, placed in the situations where he should not have been. Remember that this man is now a prisoner and a slave, and in every place that Joseph has gone, God has sovereignly given him favor in every difficult situation that sometimes has undermined and then elevated his life. There is nothing that hasn't happened to Joseph that God has not been completely in charge of. Now, I told you there are no sexy titles today, but I do remember using this text before, and it was around the theme of why you can't quit in the pit. It's why, because sometimes life comes at you in ways that don't afford you the opportunity to pick and choose. That no matter whether or not you are born again for 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, sometimes God puts you in a mess. And there's nothing you can do about it. Forget about the prosperity idea that if all you have is faith, God will bless, 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 bless. It is not true. God takes his people and sometimes dips them in the fire of tribulation so that what's in them can become manifest to the world around them. In Joseph's case, it is not different. In fact, the text says that when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar. Verse 2 says, the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. And Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. Now, the point I want to raise out of that verse is, it's one thing when all of your friends, your saved friends, notice God in you. But Potiphar is an Egyptian and therefore pagan. Now, it's one thing when your friends can see God in your life, but it's another thing when unbelievers, people who you think have no spiritual discernment at all, can look at you in a particular situation and still see God in your life. You expect that from church people because you expect church people to have a kind of insight. And in fact, this changes how you understand people who you think are unsaved. Because even the unsaved has enough insight to know whether or not you're where you need to be and whether or not God is operating in your life. You have been some places where unsaved people have looked at you and said, I thought you were a Christian. And what they mean by that is, since you say you've been born again, why are you here? And then you got to give all these explanations for why you're there that they don't buy anyhow. And you say, well, why is that, Williams? Because even the unbeliever knows what the believer ought to be about. And when they see the believer not about those things that they ought to be about, they will pick it out, call it out, and you say, well, I don't like it. Don't have to like it. It's not right, but it's real. Now, I'll admit that sometimes they don't understand what they think they know. But in this case, Potiphar at least has recognized, seen something in this man that has allowed him to identify it, appreciate it, and elevate him. Now, this case is significant, at least I think, because in everything that Joseph does, it is not only the grace of God that's operating here, but it is this incredible recognition of using what God has given him wherever God has placed him. In fact, the thing about this that I like about Joseph, it says here in the text that he's been made in charge of everything that Potiphar had, and the only thing Potiphar had to be concerned with was what he was going to eat. But skip down here inside this other passage. Here, I want to say just prior, verse 7, the B section. Joseph was very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. Now, I'm not sure how she said it. And I want to go one step further. There are people in this culture who are attractive, and they have nothing to do with how other people view them. I think what I've been watching unfold with Harvey Weinstein, celebrities in Hollywood, I think what I'd like to say specifically to women, even though we're dealing in this text with a man, is that there's some things you can't control. Because some people who are jacked up on the inside are going to look at you in a certain way, and it's through no fault of your own. I mean, I admit that you ought to be modest, etc. But in some cases, it doesn't matter what you wear. Jacked up people on the inside gonna just view you in a way that's got no relationship to who you really are, and you can't do anything about it. Joseph can't help being handsome. Joseph can't help being well-built. He didn't provoke it. He didn't ask for it. The issue is Mrs. Potiphar. It ain't Joe. She's got the problem. That's why the passage in James is appropriate. Because every now and then what you discover is there's something in your heart that needs to be dealt with. It's not the other person, it's you. Can I make this as plain as I know how? We got some years in, so I can be redundant with my illustrations, because everybody ain't heard them. You know I like to fish. And when I'm out on the boat fishing, I have concluded that the reason I catch fish is because I'm a great fisherman. Until one day, there were fish clearly around the boat, but I had no ability to pick the fish up. And it dawned on me, you're not so great. Tried every bait I could, fish wouldn't bite. And I could hear God say, it's not your skill. You catch fish on the basis of the fish's desire. If the fish doesn't want your bait, it doesn't matter how many fish are there, you can't catch him. Because the reason the fish gets caught and in your boat is not based upon your skill, it's based upon the fish's desire for your bait. And you know how you get caught? Based upon your desire. Because if you don't want the bait, you can't get hooked. So you say, God, what do I need to do? You pray and ask God to fix your desires. You say, Lord, help me to want what you want. Help me to love what you love. And anything outside of that, I don't want it. Because if you don't want it, you can't get caught. Because there's something on the inside that has to be fixed. I was in Mississippi for a conference some years ago with John Perkins. And a part of the cohort we were meeting, there was a young girl out of Northwestern who I remember sitting at the table who kind of kept watching. And you know when you feel admired. She says, Reverend, we need to go over this work. Are you going to be around about 8 this evening? And I said, sure. She said, where are you staying? I said, at the Crown Plaza. She said, what's your hotel room number? I gave it to her. She says, well, I'm going to come by maybe around about 8-ish. I said, fine. My plane left at 4:30 in the afternoon. Because sometimes you got to make sure. You say, Williams, where does that come from? In the text. It's not just that he doesn't want to sleep with her. He doesn't want to be around her. He's trying to go in, do his work. He's trying to do his job, but he can't avoid it. And sometimes you find yourself putting yourself in situations that you have no business in. And you wonder, how did I get caught? Because you put yourself in a situation where you should not have been. Young people, hear me well. Ain't no Bible study going on at 2:30 in the morning. pants down around your ankles and the Bible on the floor. You say, how did I get here? You put yourself in that situation. Here is a man who's doing everything he can, and somebody would say, well, you know what? I wonder how that works. Well, you got to understand that sometimes God places us in positions, and he does that not so that he can learn something about you, but so that you can learn something about yourself. Because there's stuff in you that you aren't even aware of that God is trying to show you. Inside this story, I want you to see something, because I want you to realize that sometimes success will breed seduction. You see, keep in mind, he's winning at everything he does, everything he touches. He's got the Midas touch. He is excelling. And the materialism that you see in this text can't be somehow the only way you understand blessing. But you have to recognize that in this text, he's achieving. And what I've discovered in this culture is that nothing fascinates people more than success. The Hebrew in this text translates as kind of wealth, fame, prominence, but it goes beyond that. It goes to results. Everything he's doing, he's getting a result. He's achieving. And somehow or another, that has become attractive. You have to be careful, though, that that's not God's full measure, but you realize that even the world recognizes that here in Joseph, at least, God is up to something in his life. And you are not at fault for that. Some of you will excel in your college careers. Some of you will excel in your corporate careers. And as you excel, just recognize that sometimes success breeds some things. It comes with some things, which is why his love for the Lord is both social and theological. You say, why is that? He says to her, the master, your husband has given me charge over everything. That's social. And I would be stupid to blow that. He says, more than that, I can't do this sin before God. That's theological. So there is this social implication. There is the theological implication that becomes the buffer for his willingness to say, no, I can't do that. It's socially not good. And it's theologically improper. And both of those things, because of his love for who God is, keep Joseph's hands tied and his heart fixed on what God has done. But you got to be careful, because you can't assume somehow that the blessings of God are always just materialistic. They're not. Because sometimes you can succeed without being materialistically wealthy. It's not opposed to it, but you can't just assume that getting more is evidences of God's blessing. It wasn't true with Jesus, he died poor. It wasn't true with the Apostle Paul, he died in prison. It wasn't even true for Martin Luther King, who died broke. Many people don't know that Martin Luther King's name was not originally Martin Luther. His name originally was Michael. His father went to Europe and was impressed with the reformers and came back and changed his name from Michael to Martin. But when Martin Luther died, he didn't even have a will, which is why the family still fights today. Harry Belafonte had to contribute and raise funds to put his kids in school and bury him. And yet nobody would deny that he was successful. So that success cannot always be equated with dollars and cents. And sometimes God takes all of us and places us in situations where even though we may not be able to measure success immediately, God is at work and doing something incredible in our lives. Don't measure God's work in your life by your bank account only. Don't measure it, because if you do, you'll miss the point. One of the things about this text that I'm loving when I look at Joseph's commitment to loyalty is it's not so much what he's done, it's what he will not do. Bear with me just for a minute, because I've described this in years gone by as deficit discipleship, in which we only appreciate people for what it is they have not done. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. And when you talk about how we measure discipleship, we tend to look at especially the young and measure their spiritual maturity and growth on the basis of what it is they have not done. So that if they don't get high, have not gotten pregnant, don't smoke, don't hang out, we applaud them and say, you're getting it done. Some people don't do things because they love God. Some people don't do things because they're scared. That is not the right measurement. When I was in college, I did not do drugs because I was in love with Jesus. I didn't do drugs because I always wanted to be aware of myself. I didn't want to wake up on Saturday and you tell me what I did Friday. I just didn't want it. People that I cared about, I watched them on Friday night. I saw them on Friday around about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Friday night around 1 a.m., they were in the hallway, and I was like, yo, why is that good? You're vomiting in every corner of the hallway. You're throwing trash cans down the hallway in rage, banging on doors, and you think that's cool. I saw that, and it wasn't, I'll never do it because I love Jesus. It was like, you know what? I ain't doing that. Now, we measure some people and their spiritual maturity based upon what it is they don't do. And sometimes it's not that they love God, it's just that they're afraid or they have other reasons. We need to start measuring a generation of young people, not on the basis of what they don't do, but on the basis of what they do. Because you see, you don't need Jesus to not do some things, but you need Jesus to do some other things. You can't love your enemy without Jesus. You can't forgive those that despitefully use you without Jesus. And you can't give in a world that tells you ought to get unless you love Jesus. And we need to measure not on the basis of what people don't do, but start looking at it on the basis of what they are accomplishing and how they're manifesting the fruit of the Spirit in love, faith, self-control, patience, temperance. Those become the measurements for when God is working in your life. And when you're able to not cuss nobody out because of your love for the Lord, when you're realizing how to love those who cuss you out, now you've got the right balance. When you're trying to give more than you get, now you've got the right balance. And am I making sense to you at all? He is falsely accused, and here's what you got to know. When you find yourself in that situation, you got to know that you belong to the Lord who defends the innocent, who defends the weak, and can help give you hope and keep you from giving up. You see, in between the time of your rescue, your deliverance, you got to keep being who it is God made you to be. What struck me in this narrative is that when he's in Potiphar's house, he's serving because that's who God made him. And he's doing his administrative thing, he is working in a way that is consistent with who he is in Potiphar's house. Then when he gets to prison, he is still working. The text says here inside verse 19, Potiphar was furious when he heard the wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. But the Lord was with him in prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite in the prison with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. Don't you know, sometimes when people lie on you and accuse you of things, it can change you and keep you from being who you're supposed to be. You see, he could have got in prison. He could have got in Potiphar's house and said, you done me wrong. You lied on me, and became someone other than who he is. I think the real test of how God is working in your life is if you can be true to who God made you to be, even when falsely accused. It's too easy to step out of character and become somebody else because somebody did you wrong. And you see, this is not a deterrent based upon fear. Joseph is able to do this because of love. It's his devotion to God that keeps him serving this way in light of being accused. Potiphar's wife lied on him, got him thrown in prison, and he could have become bitter for the rest of his life. But instead, he keeps on being who he is. I hear people who've been in bad relationships, and they say things like, well, they'll never do this again. They'll never do that again. They'll never fall in love again. They'll never trust this person again. That's foolishness. I'm not minimizing that you've been hurt. But if you've been in a relationship where somebody hurt you, and now you say what you'll never do again, then that person is still controlling you. That person still is controlling your life. And who wants to give somebody that kind of control? He could have said, well, you know what, Mrs. Potiphar did me wrong, and I'm never going to serve anybody anywhere else again. No, what he did was he kept his nose to the grindstone. He kept on being who he was. Listen, if you friendly, you can't stop being friendly because somebody hurt you. You can learn from it. You can be wise, but you don't suddenly become sour. Somebody walk up to you and say, what happened to you? You used to be so nice. Well, I've been hurt, so now I just become mean and nasty. No, God is blessing him in spite of this. And in this situation, God is allowing him to succeed, but God is also allowing him to be sustained. You say, Williams, why is that true? And I'm rushing to the finish line. Because people can steal your coat, but they can't steal your character. Yeah, she got his coat. And he had to run out, which is another thought. Because sometimes, you know what some of your problem is? You won't run. You think you can get close to it. Sniff it. Touch it. When what you ought to do is run. Don't you know there's some stuff you can't handle? And rather than play around with it, you need to just leave the coat, keep your character, and be in the wind. Am I making sense? There's some stuff you just can't play with. You have to see it for what it is, and you have to flee. Because if you don't, you'll get caught. In the midst of this, there is a kind of spiritual depth. Because not only will nothing succeed like success in this case, but I also want you to know that nothing sustains like success. You say, why is that? Because here is a man who is now in prison. And if God is for you, who can be against you? Doesn't mean you won't ever hurt. I could understand him being imprisoned if he had done something wrong. That might make sense. But this man is in prison. And here's what I want you to know. Godliness doesn't rescue you from attack. I know that's a popular notion, which is why I want to push against it as hard as I know how. This idea that if I live right and I do the right things, God will bless me. All right? Hold on to that mindset. But in this narrative, he has done the right things. He has been faithful. He has lived righteously, and he still was lied on. And he's in prison. Because you can live right and still, because God is who God is, put you in a situation and what's in you will come out. If you take a lemon and squeeze it, pulp pops out because that's what's inside the lemon. And sometimes God places you in environments so that you can see what's really inside of you. He hasn't done anything wrong. He didn't hurt anybody. He did everything right. And every day, Mrs. Potiphar came after him. He went in on Monday and she came at him. He went in on Tuesday and she came at him. And on Wednesday, and guess what he did? He held up under the assault. He has done absolutely nothing wrong. And yet he sits in prison. Haven't you ever wondered, God, why is it that trying to live righteously sometimes turns out into suffering? Have you ever wondered that? 2, 3 people said, yeah. Have you ever wondered, Lord, I'm trying to do the right thing, and in spite of trying to do the right thing, things still seem to be blowing up in my face? I know you've come seeking an answer to that question. I simply don't have it. Every now and then, God perplexes us. And if you're only living right in order to get blessed, then you're living for the wrong reasons. Because you need something to sustain you, which is simply a love for him, which doesn't wane when you have and when you don't have. You see, when you don't have is not the time to get spiritual. Going to the place of loving him all the time, so that when he's blessing, you're loving. When he's taking, you're loving. That's the goal of authentic Christian living. To say, Lord, no matter what you do, I'm going to worship you. It's why pastors and preachers feel like they got to work so hard on Sunday. Because if people are not up, they can't worship God. And so you have to learn how to come and raise your hands and tell God you're loving when you just got fired. You have to come ready to give him glory when you just got a bad diagnosis from your doctor. You got to come and give him glory when you just fell out with relatives. You got to come and say, God, it doesn't matter what's happening. You're still worthy to be glorified. You're still worthy to be honored. And no matter what's happening in the home, on the job, or where I am, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. And when you learn how to bless him on the down days, then it's much easier to bless him on the up days, because all you're doing is what you've always done, no matter. Am I making sense to you? That you don't just give God glory when you feel like it. When arthritis says keep your hands down, you raise them anyhow. When you've got pain, you stand up anyhow. When you understand what he's doing and don't understand, you say, Lord, I know you'll make a way because you're still God. And I've seen you do it before. You say, Williams, how was that? Because he's sustained in prison, because he's seen what God can do. From the pit to the prison and ultimately to the palace. What Joseph can do is look back on his life and remember that there was a time when my brothers sold me. But God allowed me to get into Potiphar's employ, and I've come up from there. And now that I'm in the prison, the same God, by looking back at what that God did, gives me hope for the future. If he took me out of the pit, he can take me out of the prison. If he takes me out of the prison, he can get me to the palace. And once you know who God is, it changes how you go through your dark day, your difficult day, your hurt day. You move with hope, saying, God, I'm yours. Do what you want to do, but I'm coming out because of who you are. Is there anybody here that can say, I know that's right? Because I've had some days when it looked like we were going to crash and burn, but God picked me up, turned me around, moved me forward by his grace. It sustains you. You realize you can have a hope because of what he's already brought you through. And in that, God is always glorified. In that, God is always honored. And it's always too soon to quit on God. Never give up on what he can do. And you go through serving, being what God has called you to be, because that's what he has called us to model in a world desperately seeking to see it. And so my hope is that as we look at this life, we realize that this is a man who did what he did for love. He didn't do it out of duty. He did it out of devotion. Joseph obviously can't be perfect. Nobody in Scripture is. But I tell you what, talk about a child that do love Jesus. Here's one. This man's love for the Lord grounded him through success, through seduction, and it sustained him even in the midst of hard times. And my prayer for you is that you would leave this place so in love with Christ that no matter what you are going through or have to go through, your love for him will not wane, and that you'll keep on being who you are, serving, living, laughing, because you love him, to the glory and honor of his name.